The Fishing Gurus Podcast.
Controversial one, this one, Mr. Bennett.
Ooh.
I didn't know whether this had caused some problems doing this particular podcast, but I want to talk to you about something that's created quite a stir within anglers, a lot of conversations, especially in the commercial side of our scene. It's caused a lot of rule changes in fisheries up and down the UK, and I dare say maybe even in Europe. The overshotted rig.
Yeah.
It's got several names which we will definitely not be using on the podcast, but the overshotted rig, is it fishing or is it not?
Well, it catches fish, doesn't it? No doubt about that. Personally, I don't enjoy fishing it. I think it's a big leveler.
What do you mean by a leveler?
I just think it makes catching F1s a lot easier. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a skill to it. There's certain ways. It's evolved over the years. First time I probably ever seen it was years and years ago back at Brookside. I want to say Alan Dewhurst was probably the first person I seen fishing it. And then, you know, he likes of Jamie Hughes, Openshaw, the Wirral lads. They were just fishing like BBs, pushing them under the bush. Very similar to what we do now. But it's a lot more refined now.
Tell us exactly what it is, because anyone listening, we're talking about this overshotted rig. Get it on the table.
Yeah, so
tell people what it is.
So it's a way of fishing shallow where everything's like in line, direct. So if you was fishing with a float, you would overshot it so it sinks. And then because it sinks, everything's tight. As soon as the fish touches your hook bait, it basically hooks itself. And then there's things like a jigger, which is inline, free running, similar sort of principle. But obviously with a jigger, you have stops and stuff, so it stops. With an overshotted rig, you tend to fish it to your pole tip a little bit more. So it's it does work different to a jigger. But it's the same principle. It's a self-hooking rig. And yeah, like the first time I seen it was probably years ago back at Brookside. Alan Dewhurst, people like that, used to fish it under the tree. They had really good success with it. And we just used to put a BB on, 4 inches from the hook, hold your pole tip there, and eventually the fish would hook itself. It's a bit like the floating pole back in the day.
I was just going to say, I'm getting floating pole vibes from that side of it.
A bit like floating pole back in the day, which used to be really good. You know, I used to fish it in Fishermania finals. It was unbeatable at times. But again, like, how much can you do with a floating pole? You put a certain amount of line on your pole tip, you lie it on the water, and you fire bait it. Like, it takes the skill out of slapping, takes the skill out of fishing the right shotting pattern. You know, do you want shot down your line? Do you want shot under your float? Do you want a free falling hook bait? Do you want something, you know, when you're F1 fishing, you need a bit of weight down your line sometimes so you can see your bites. Otherwise, you just miss every single bite if you had no shot down. Whereas if you was carp fishing, you fish for less bites, you'd probably have a free falling hook bait like a big pellet with no shot down your line, and that could be better. So it eliminates different floats, different shotting patterns, and people have got so skillful at it now and they understand it compared to, say, 10 years ago. You know, it sort of levels the playing field, and it's almost like whoever draws the best peg, they know how to catch them shallow, and that's it. Like, you can only catch a certain amount of fish doing certain methods. So if I'm fishing shallow, for example, I could potentially catch 200 or 300 pound of F1s, but I would never catch that fishing on the bottom at 5 meters or down my margin or fishing across to an island at 40 meters. So it's near enough the only way to win. But then when everybody's doing the same thing, it's a bit boring and monotonous, and it makes me not want to sort of fish them matches a little bit, because I'm not saying it don't work, and I will do it myself. If I'm in a qualifier and I'm missing a million bites, I'll try it because it eliminates missed bites. It makes catching the fish easier. You know, you hook 100% of the fish.
Would you say that it enables people who could never really beat the likes of yourself at shallow fishing for F1s to potentially be able to beat you?
Oh, 100%. Like, the skill of fishing shallow is like, you lay your rig in, you hold your line tight. So it all comes down to, you know, how stable you can keep your pole. Can you feed with your catapult and keep your pole tip still? Can you do that at long range without, you know, can you feed while still concentrating on your float to hit that bite? you know, when you're fishing shallow, for F1s in particular, roach are a little bit different than eyed, but when you're F1 fishing, you can still get the fish to sort of hook themselves if you can hold a tight line. But, you know, it's a lot harder than something that's doing the job for you.
Yeah, if you've got an overshotted rig on, it's all tight, doesn't matter where the float is, fish grabs your bait up itself. What about the development of this rig? Because you talked about the early days at Brookside, a piece of line, a BB shot 4 inches from the hook, and you said that people have taken that to another level now. How's it developed? How's it changed?
So obviously back in, say, the early 2000s when I was fishing Brookside, I was younger, it'd be a BB on a piece of line. You wouldn't even have a float. You just sort of like hold your pole tip, you know, a little bit higher or a little bit lower, and you'd sort of just lower it down and you think, right, that's took it 3 inches from my tip. So the next trip you go in, you just hold it 3 inches out of the water, your tip, and that's where the fish would be and you'd be catching them.
So even then they were a knack to it.
There's still a knack to it, yeah. There's still the same anglers still won fishing that sort of rig. And then over time we realised, you know, you've got this BB, and this BB, if you move your pole tip, this BB is dragging your hook bait down fast. It's sinking like a brick. So F1s love to watch bait falling. So you're trying to imitate this wafting sort of motion. So I want to say the first person I'd probably seen fishing longer hook lengths was Chris Weeder. He was fishing like pre-tied 6-8 inch hook lengths. And it's like, oh, he's just lazy. He's fishing pre-tied hook lengths 6-8 inches, but he was doing it because he wanted to create this waft. And his bulk was 6 inches above, so he'd be flicking his rig all the time. And you think, how does that fish ever hook itself? Like, his float is never still. And he'd have a 6 inch hook length for his bulk higher, and as he flicked it, the bait's obviously moving. The fish come in, take the bait. When you lift up next time, because you're lifting up regular, it's already got it in its mouth, and then you lift into the fish. So a lot of time you can lift into the fish.
You're not even seeing a bite or getting.
You're just moving your rig, and it's, you know, when it's windier, you'd have more shot. When it's not as windy, you could have less shot, because your shot is obviously going to drag your hook bait down quicker.
Yeah.
So you don't really want a BB. Now you'd be all, you know, now people who fish really light floats, say they take 2 number 10s to shot, you only have to put 1 number 8 on and it sinks it. So people might fish 4 number 10s or 3 number 9s overshotted. All of a sudden that sinks. But if you put 5 number 9s on, it'll sink like a brick, because once it's under the water, it just sinks dead quick.
So people have developed it to enable the rig to be overshotted, but still trying to control the sink. You're
getting all the benefits of a light, slow falling rig. You know, your hook bait's not going like this with a BB. It's sort of wafting up, taking time for the fish to take it, and then because you're flicking your tip all the time, you'll catch them on the way up sometimes. Jigger's the opposite, because I mean Christian Jones, you know, he's took like a jigger to the next level where he's fishing it almost, so when you go to Lindholm, he's fishing it almost like you would an overshotted rig, and he's moving it all the time. So he's fishing a bigger jigger with more shot on, and like, say, I think he likes to fish, say, a 5 inch hook length, and he'd be moving it all the time. And, you know, this year, I think he had the record on Bonsai and Willers at Lindholm, 2 days out of 5 doing
That's
it.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
amazing.
it's like, so it's almost like when it's on it, you don't miss a bite. It's unbeatable. Do you know what I mean? But he's sort of like developed that.
But the jigger is different to an overshotted rig.
Yeah, but it's the same principle in sort of it's hooking itself.
Right.
But it's all self-hooking rigs in general. It's like, I feel it takes, you know, I've just been down to Tunnel Barn last week, and I always felt like a lighter, slow-falling rig was better. You know, a little 3/8 float, 3 number 11, strung out, get the fish to watch it, you're hitting bites. There comes a certain time of the year when the F1s don't want to be chasing the bait, and the overshotted rig won't work. But when they're aggressive in the summer, it is nigh on unbeatable. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not missing any bites. The only downside to it is you've got to work out what depth they're at. But when the fish are feeding aggressive in the summer, they're normally sort of 10 to 18 inches. Like, you've only got to work out an 8 inch window. They're normally quite high up. Whereas this time of the year, you could catch them at 18 inch, you could catch them at 3 foot. Depending on the volume of fishing you peg, they could be up and down all the time. And if you're missing bites, it's like you've got to adjust your depth by an inch or two. I just think it levels it out a bit when it's over. You know, it's a bit. It just levels it out. It's a bit easier.
Makes catching the fish easy, undoubtedly, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, very easy to catch because you don't miss a bite. You know, you're not striking at anything. You're not.
What's the actual? Again, I'm coming at this from a bit outside. What's the actual problem with it though? Because to me, it doesn't sound like anybody's breaking any rules.
What is the problem, Bagger? Because obviously some fisheries have banned it.
Well, some fisheries have banned it because people don't enjoy fishing that way. There's no problem. I'll fish it if I have to, and I would never want anything to be banned. But I sort of wish it weren't allowed. I do like traditional style of fishing where I just think it makes the skill level better. Tackle shops are selling more floats, more shot. Do you know what I mean? It's like I feel like it's made fishing a little bit too easy. And, you know, I've fished for F1s for 20 odd years, but I can't remember any F1 matches that I went on as an open this summer just because I don't really enjoy that way of fishing.
Would you say that where it is allowed, it's dominated matches?
Oh, 100%. And it's sort of like spreading across the country now. Like it started in the north, I would say. It's made its way a bit further south. We fished a big festival in the summer and you look back at the videos and every single angler's doing it. And it's like, it just sort of like, it's too much samey. And I just think it's not a great thing for fishing. Do you know what I mean?
Sounds like a bit of a cheat code. Like anybody, give it to anybody
of,
half competent, it's gonna.
You're gonna catch some fish on it.
But are they banning? Sorry, are they banning it because it's dangerous, or are they banning it simply because?
No, there's no danger to it. It's just a great fish catching method, but it's almost is a bit like a cheat code. Do you know what I mean? If you know what you're doing, and obviously going back 10, 15 years ago, people wouldn't understand because there were no social media and there were no videos. Now we're all out doing videos, and people get to know about it and subscribe to certain channels and they'll be showing it, and it's like I just think you'll all just end up doing the same because F1s 90% of the time in the summer you've got to catch shallow to win, and it just, you know, it's like I don't really want to go there and do that. I enjoy changing rigs and fishing this float and that float, and I have 3 different styles of float for my rig. Like when it's windy, for example, we went to Lindholm on the summer festival. When it's windy, you can't fish a nice little light rig. Like the water moves as a volume, you know, and it sort of rocks, and it's something I learned from you at Tamar, but I never really thought about it when I'm fishing. He's like, you know, you need to put more line on the bottom. It's the same principle when you're shallow fishing. You're fishing these light rigs, the rocking, the water's moving as a volume. When you're fishing on canalised lakes, you don't get that. So when you go to these big open waters like Lindholm, Loco and Benny's at Lindholm, and it's 8 foot deep, and you've got a lot of water movement. Little light rigs don't work, and a jigger is 1,000 times better because it gives you more stability. Or a heavier shallow float, like something that takes 4 number 10 shot instead of 2 number 10 shot, will work better.
Twice as heavy, isn't it? When you think about it, really.
Yeah.
Percentage wise, it's twice as big.
But it's like, I'm using the wrong float, whereas it sort of eliminates all that and makes it a little bit easier because your rig's so stable. You can achieve the perfect presentation.
It almost doesn't. It doesn't matter because you've.
And, you know, if you have your shot too low, something I learned from Christian. Christian's really good at that style of fishing. He's took it to another level now, and he'd be like, he'll push his float quite close to his connector. I'm like, nah, that's not right. He's like, it is, because otherwise your bait won't fall how it wants. So I'm like, all right.
What does he mean? I don't understand that. Tell me more. I want to learn.
So if your float creates resistance. So if you have your float, say 4 inches away from your tip, when you flick it up, your float is wanting to float and your shot wants to sink. So your bait can fall through too slow sometimes. Whereas if you push it up to your connector, as you flick it up, it free falls quicker because there's no resistance. Your float's out of the water. So it'll fall that little bit quicker, and then you'll get your waft. So your float, do you need it or not? I don't know. I've seen Weeder fish it where he'll fish a long line one. He'll fish a dead long line, he'll flick it, and his float will just sometimes go through slower. And it's hard. There is right and wrong way, depending on how windy it is and stuff like that. There's definitely a skill to it. Do you know what I mean? Because the same anglers are really good at it, and some anglers will catch... They'll still catch more than what they would do on a fixed rig, but they won't catch as much as people like Chris and Weeder and stuff. But I think you float in the right position, the right weight float. So, for example, if you fished a float that took 4 number 10s compared to 2 number 10s, to overshot it, it might take 3 number 9s. So straight away, you've got 2 extra 10s by picking the wrong float. So you still need to pick the right float. Yeah. But once you have picked the right float, it's the only float you ever need. So like 2 number 10 dibber is the only float you really ever need, because you want it as light as possible. You want no resistance in the rig, basically, so it sinks easier. So
if you wanted a heavier one, you just overshot that same float by more.
By more, yeah.
Got you.
So I do miss that side of, like, you know, years ago when I was going pastures all the time, you'd have like a dibber for really shallow, a slim float for fishing on the drop, an F1 style shallow float for like slapping, made a bit more noise. Going into the winter, you'd have a deep, shallow, slim patterned light float, like a roach rig. You know, you'd have 3 or 4 different types of floats and different shotting patterns. Whereas with that, it just sort of...
You just need one rig that's overshot and lower it down a bit further.
But again, it sounds... You know, I'll probably get hate for this, but it sounds like a way in which, in some ways, it's made the wider field a bit more competitive, because it sounds like a technique that just sounds easier. To me, on face value, what you're saying to me is I could have all these different floats and shot in various ways, or I could just do this one way and that'd be fine for a lot of what I need.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's what it is.
Definitely.
It's like having an aiming system on your cue, do you know what I mean? Well, you're never gonna miss a pot. All you have to worry about is the speed control, do you know what I mean? It's like you're never going to miss. You just got to make sure you hit it softer or harder.
If it was legal in a match, would you use it?
If I need to, I'd use it, but I don't enjoy using it. If I was going on a normal open match, I wouldn't use it because I don't enjoy doing it.
Okay, but
so it might cost me the win, and it has done loads of times in the past.
What, just through stubbornness?
Just through stubbornness of like, I don't really want to fish it.
Do you get mardy when you see other people using it?
No, I don't get mardy. I just think some days I think they're missing out on fish. 100%, they could definitely catch more doing something else, like a normal rig. But when you see every single angler doing it, then it's like, you know, you're watching videos and you think, there was a festival in the summer we fished, and every single video was the same thing. And I just thought, do we want fishing to be that monotonous? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't personally, I never advocate trying to get it banned. Each to their own. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing going forward. Like,
Matt, what do you think of it?
I'm not against people catching fish on it, and listening to Andy even in this conversation, there's definitely right and wrong ways of doing it, and lots of little tweaks you can do to get an edge even with an overshotted rig. But I think that there's more little tweaks and more little edges that better anglers who practice things more and think about things in more detail can get an edge by not using it. So if it were banned, better anglers would do better overall. There'd be more good anglers came to the top, I think. It allows worse anglers to do well, but I'm not saying that it's not skillful at all. I think there's still lots of little things you can do. The thing that always strikes me with people like him and all who I consider to be the best at what they do, it's the tiny little things. It's I've moved my float 1.5 inches and they were definitely at that depth. It were better, or I picked a different rig up that had got a slightly different bristle and I just seemed to hit more bites. And I eased back from 30 casters to sort of 20, and it was so much more settled. Like, it's the tiny, tiny little things that make the biggest difference that I always think allow the best anglers to do well. And I'm saying that the overshotted rig probably takes a little bit of that out of it. Definitely. Right. Like he's saying, if it's a windy day and all the fish are out in the lake, 11.5, 13 metres, fishing shallow, something that he's practiced and honed and taken a hold of, holding his pole stable, accuracy of feeding, being able to put his rig in really nicely and hold it more stable than someone next to him, and he beats them by 12, 15, 20 pound, that might not happen if overshotted rigs are allowed, because there's so much taken away from it skill-wise in terms of presentation, holding it still, depth even a little bit. And
when you're fishing like an overshotted rig, you're fishing 100% of the time.
yes,
When you're having to slap your rig in or relay your rig or hold your pole still, like one of the big things is you can slap your rig, and if you don't hold your pole tip still, your rig will bounce back out. Well, it's not natural. If you can slap your rig and hold your pole still and create that natural fall, you can almost get the fish to hook themselves or get a bite every chuck. Like, I think in any sport, you should try and make it as skillful as possible, not take the skill set away. It's like, say you went on a river, you know, the skill of trotting a stick float is mending your line, making sure your float's running through nice. If you could just fish a 30-foot rod and overshot it and he went down, then your tip just hooked the fish against it. It's like taking all the skill away. And he'd be like, I don't enjoy this anymore. Do you know what I mean? I was really good at running a stick float down the river. I was brilliant at controlling my line, and I could get my float to run perfect every time, and I would get more bites because his float was dragging back on the inside, and he weren't, you know, he couldn't do it when it was windy. And, you know, I think skill, that sort of skill element, it's the same with shallow fishing. You probably had all this when method feeders come out. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, it makes easier casting because you can hide your hook bait and you can cast 2 inches from the bank, whereas with a cage feeder, you'd be stuck in the far bank and blah, blah, blah. It's like, but, you know, and I'm not saying it should be banned or out like that, but I just think this year in particular, it sort of put me off a little bit of like, I don't really want to go and fish like that. Do you know what I mean? So I don't enjoy it.
What about, I suppose, a better way to put this question to you, to get an honest opinion from you both, is what would you do? Say you were fishing quite a big match, I don't know, maybe not saying a big final, but something of importance, and you'd have come second. And I've started to notice this more in the more live matches I do. There's a lot of chat afterwards about, oh, what did you do? How did you do that? What would you do if you went and spoke to whoever come first? And they said, oh, just overshotted it. What would be your honest opinion on, how would you respond in that moment? Is it with...
Well, it won't bother me. It don't
bother
me.
you?
It won't
You
bother
would-
me one bit. Like, it's happened for years. It's nothing new. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
But if there was... Like, there's certain fisheries in the north where it's 12-inch line limit, and there's certain venues where you can only fish a certain depth shallow, which I don't like that rule. Do you know what I mean? Because I think some days they do want to be really high up. But I agree with, like, Whiteacres, where I've just been, it's a 10-inch line limit. It just makes you've got to be slightly more skillful holding you, especially if you're shallow fishing. Deck fishing, it's different. You know what I mean? Line length's not as important, but shallow fishing for F1s, I think the overshotted rig has made fishing that little bit easier.
I think it's something that's come to the forefront as well. With fishing getting better and better and better, and weights getting bigger, and people are looking for ways that they can just get a fish on the hook as quick as possible. And it's probably a whole other podcast and debate, the big weight fishing, 500-600 pound, even 200-300 pound of F1s.
Yeah.
It's crazy fishing. You're fishing for mammoth numbers of fish, really, that even in my time in angling, I can't ever remember there being as many silly big weights as there is now. F1 fishing, 100 pound were a very big weight 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now 200 and 300 is really, really popular, common. You see it every week at many different venues. And I think that it's natural that the masses of anglers have tried to derive methods that help them catch as many fish as possible. And the overshotted rig has come out of that. You know, if people were still fishing for £80, £100, there weren't as many fish in these places, we probably wouldn't have seen it become as popular as it is now.
Yeah, you won't miss as many bites. You won't feel like you're missing out on fish. It's just another method, isn't it, that catches more fish. There's no doubt about that. It's deadly. You know, if I had to do it, I will do it in a qualifier or whatever. I have won qualifiers doing it. But then it's just about the catching, innit? It's not like, oh, I need to tweak this or tweak that. You still got to tweak things, do you know what I mean? I'm not trying to discredit it. I just don't enjoy it personally myself.
I wonder what else we'll see. Like, do you think we'll see another overshotted rig come into play in the next few years? What'll be the next lethal method?
I don't think they feed like that on the bottom, so I can't see anything coming from that. Do you know what I mean? No, I don't know. How can you improve on that? Unless the fish.
Yeah, I suppose.
The only thing you could do is have your shot right next to your hook, because we've pretty much done everything else.
Yeah.
But
Or we think we have.
We think we have. It's
That's what
hard
I was going to
see
say.
where-
If any of you got any ideas, anything that
No,
you thought, oh, if I
I don't
changed
know.
that would.
I want to get Bagger on this year's underwater, so
Yeah.
you might see something on that,
Yeah.
and like you never know. But I mean, I wonder what's coming next.
We guess how we think the fish feed, do you know what I mean? But every time
Yeah.
you're watching underwater, you learn something new, different, and it's like, I'm going to do that next time, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting when we do the poll, you know, what comes of it. Might develop a new method from it. Might watch how F1s feed and think, I'm doing it wrong all the time, do you know what I mean? It'd be interesting to watch how the rig behaves and stuff like that. Like, I have put them in tanks and watched them, and they do behave how I think they do.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the fish grabs it and they lift back into it. Do they? Do you know what I mean? Feels that way when you're fishing, but maybe it doesn't work exactly how you think it does.
Who knows? Who knows? So to wrap it up, Bagger, give me one sentence. Overshotted rig. Thoughts and feelings.
It's not for me.
That was short and sweet, wasn't it? That was short
was,
and
wasn't
sweet.
it?
Oh, hope you enjoyed that one, folks. Make your own mind up. Comment below what you think about the overshotted rig. Is it fishing or is it not?